I guess that was some time ago. Do you remember? I mean, that's something I probably remember the last time you saw her. That'd be pretty special.
This is what Robert Pape had to say about his last encounter with Becky Friedli. Even though they dated for a year and she died months after breaking up with him, Robert claimed he had no memory of their last encounter. Even when there were records of him and his bestie threatening Becky at her workplace a day before her gruesome death, Robert stood there, blasé, saying he couldn't remember. That was 8 years ago.
You know anything about some type of argument she had with some of these days? Did you ever do with her over anything? Hard. I guess I can't think of anything offhand. No.
Indeed, this was why he was so blasé about it in the first place. Experience had taught him that no matter how entitled or aggressive he was, authorities ignored him. It took 12 years for Becky to get justice, even as a photo of her charred, smoking body was plastered all over California. Why did the authorities side with the killers for so long? How were they caught? And what does Becky's family want everyone to remember moving past this tragedy? This is the shockingly dark story of Becky Friedli. On September 17, 2006, firefighters responded to reports of a house fire in the remote mountain community of Pinyon Pines, located above California's Coachella Valley. When they arrived at that secluded property, they were met with a gruesome scene that would forever change the lives of all involved. Inside the still smoldering ruins of the home, they discovered two bodies, 53-year-old Becky Friedli and her 55-year-old boyfriend, John Hayward. Both had been shot to death before the fire was set. From the get-go, firefighters knew that this wasn't an accidental house fire. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come, one that would shake even the most seasoned investigators to their core. Shockingly enough, the photo of it is still public. Outside of the home in a wheelbarrow near the front of the property, firefighters found the badly burned remains of 18-year-old Becky Friedli, Vicky's daughter. She was still smoking. Imagine how hard this hit Becky's older sister, Tanya.
I learned that Becky was found in a wheelbarrow. Apparently she had been placed in this fire. My baby sister was caught.
Or the middle sister, Drew.
I think it's just mortifying when you find out that somebody could be that horrible and sinister. Like something you'd see in a horror flick as opposed to real life.
Becky's body was so badly charred that her exact cause of death could not be determined. It was clear, however, that she had been deliberately placed in the wheelbarrow and set on fire. A final act of cruelty that spoke volumes about the killer's state of mind.
We're still waiting for positive identification on 3 bodies found at a burned-out home in Pinyon Pines.
We knew right away that everyone was dead.
The brutality and apparent premeditation of the crimes shocked the quiet mountain community to its very foundation. Neighbors who had felt safe in their isolated homes now locked their doors at night, wondering who among them could have committed such a horrific act. And the question on everyone's lips was, why target this seemingly ordinary family? As investigators began painstakingly piecing together the events of that fateful night, it quickly became apparent that Becky had likely been the primary target of this savage attack. The staging of her body in the wheelbarrow seemed designed to send a message. This was personal, a crime of passion or revenge, rather than a random act of violence. For those who knew Becky well, there was another horrible detail. As a young child, Becky had been badly burned in a kitchen accident, leaving her with scars and a lifelong fear of fire. Whoever killed her knew about this fear and chose to use it against her in the cruelest way possible. According to the detectives who investigated the scene, even the position of the wheelbarrow, far away from the house, was intentional.
We think it was to pose her, and they wanted to leave some kind of symbol, make it as personal as possible.
What was left of the Friedli family would use this billboard to incite action. If this didn't make people angry, nothing would. This should not be the end of anyone's life, let alone a young, innocent woman with a fear of fire. Becky and her parents deserved more. Sadly, it would take more than a decade to conclude the triple murder investigation and bring the culprits to justice. Becky Friedli was a force of nature, funny and outgoing and full of life. Her sister Tanya described her as a super fun, bubbly, and she said she relished being the loudest, funniest person in any room.
Always had a smile on her face. She was always there for you.
She's smart. Becky used to actually help Tanya and Drew with their homework. And you know, she's 4 years younger than them.
Friends remembered her infectious laugh and the ability to light up any gathering. A young woman who lived life to the fullest and brought joy to those around her. Becky and her sisters came from a blended family. Her parents, Vicky and Ron Friedli, had divorced years earlier, but both remained active in their children's lives. Ron, a former sheriff's deputy, had actually built the family home in Pinyon Pines with his own hands, a labor of love that became the backdrop for both happy memories and ultimate tragedy. After the divorce, Vicky remained in the home with her new partner, John, and her youngest daughter, Becky, after the older sisters left for work in other states. Despite the challenges of their remote location, with spotty cell service and few neighbors, the family seemed happy and settled in their peaceful mountain home.
My mom was just a very kind-hearted, wonderful woman.
She loved being a mom. She loved gardening. She loved sewing and quilting and cooking.
At 18, Becky was just beginning to spread her wings and figure out her path in life. She worked as a waitress at a local Denny's restaurant, and she was considering her options for the future, dreaming of what her life might become. And like many young women her age, she was also navigating the ups and downs of romantic relationships, learning about love and heartbreak as she went. It was one relationship in particular, however, that would ultimately put her in the crosshairs of a killer, a stark reminder of the potential dangers lurking in toxic connections.
I think it was her first love.
Dun, 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 dun.
I just think she was madly in love with him.
In the months leading up to her death, Becky had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with a boy named Robert Pape. The two had dated for about a year in high school, with Robert even giving Becky a promise ring at one point, a symbol of commitment that now seems tragically ironic in hindsight. Those close to Becky began to notice troubling signs as the relationship progressed. Red flags that, in retrospect, were glaring warnings of the danger to come. Robert reportedly became very possessive and controlling of Becky, exhibiting behavior that went beyond normal teenage jealousy and into the realm of emotional abuse.
When her and I went on vacation about 10 months before she died, he called about 20, 30 times in a night, just harassing her, wanting to talk to her while we were hanging out with friends.
20 to 30 times in one night?
Minutes within each other.
Yeah, you heard that right. And it gets worse. Becky's cousin Daniela later recalled that there were a lot of weird phone calls where Robert would say things like, "No one else can have you," or "You're mine." They were creepy as they were back then, but now they're downright stomach-turning.
As soon as I found out that it was a homicide, I knew that Robert was involved.
Fitting the profile, when Becky broke things off with him, Robert did not seem to accept that it was over. Instead of moving on, he continued to try to insert himself into Becky's life, showing up uninvited at her workplace and sending her messages. Some were downright chilling.
She came to my house 3 weeks before she died and said he had even threatened to kill me. Those are her exact words. He even threatened to kill me.
His behavior became increasingly erratic and concerning, culminating in a frightening incident just days before the murders. On September 16th, the day before the killings, Robert and his friend Christian Smith confronted Becky at the Denny's where she worked, getting into a heated argument with her that required intervention from restaurant staff. That night, Becky spoke to her bestie, Javier, and she said she had agreed to go hiking with Robert and Christian the following night, seemingly in an attempt to smooth things over and get them to leave her alone. Javier was worried about the Denny's incident and about her decision, but Becky played it cool. "It'll be over in no time, and I won't have to see him again." It was a decision born of fear and a desire for peace, but one that tragically may have sealed Becky's fate. This would be the last conversation Daniela would have with her cousin, a fact that would haunt her for years to come. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, investigators looked at several potential suspects and motives, casting a wide net in an attempt to solve this horrific crime. They questioned Becky's father, Ron, the retired sheriff's deputy, but he was quickly cleared after providing an alibi that placed him hours away from the time of the crimes. This eliminated what might have been an easy solution to the case, forcing investigators to look elsewhere for answers. Becky's ex-boyfriend, Robert Pape, and his friend, Christian Smith, were also questioned early on, given their confrontation with Becky the day before the murders. Even though he was hardly an adult yet, Pape was already on the community's radar. People just did not seem to love his entitled attitude.
Everyone was whispering about Robert.
They moved pretty quickly in the direction of Robert.
Javier also spoke to the officers, telling them about Becky's plans to go hiking with the two men that day. Both men denied any involvement and claimed they had canceled plans to go hiking with Becky that night. Instead, they said they had gone to church and then played video games at Smith's father's house before going paintballing at a local school. It was an alibi that seemed designed to paint them as ordinary, law-abiding citizens. Hey, they even threw the word church in there. Despite the suspicious confrontation at Denny's the day before and cell phone records that contradicted parts of their story, detectives did not have enough concrete evidence to charge Pape and Smith at the time. The case soon went cold, leaving Becky's family devastated and desperate for answers. They were left to grapple not only with their overwhelming grief, but also with the knowledge that the person responsible for their loved one's death was still walking free. For years, the triple murder remained unsolved, a dark cloud hanging over the community and a source of constant pain for Becky's family. Her father, Ron, was devastated. Years passed, and his former sheriff's office, the one he had worked at for decades, was doing nothing to pursue this tragedy.
I really wasn't ready because I really felt in my heart that I thought the sheriff's department was going to solve it. I really did.
6 years into this anguish, Ron gave one of his former buddies, a PI named Lewis, the green light to look into the case.
I knew that we can get this back on the front page where it needed to be and get those phones burning again.
In a sad irony, Lewis found more in a few months than the PD had found in years. It would take nearly 8 years for significant progress to be made in solving Becky's murder. 8 long years during which her family never gave up hope for justice. In 2012, Louise, together with Fidelis, put up this billboard all over California. It was sickening, but it was the only way, they thought, people who knew anything would start talking. In 2014, all the traction that the case got again pushed investigators to take another look at old evidence using updated forensic techniques. They also received new information from tipsters who had been reluctant to come forward earlier, perhaps out of fear or a desire not to get involved, but who now felt compelled to share what they knew. Some of the key evidence that emerged during this renewed investigation painted a damning picture of Robert Pape and Christian Smith. Cell phone records showed their phones pinging off towers near the crime scene around the time of the murders, contradicting their claims about their whereabouts that night.
They came out of their way to find Becky. Hard to say if John and Vicky were collateral damage.
To think about how they must have been pleading for their lives, how scared all of them were, is horrifying.
It was only in 2014 that detectives started taking seriously testimonies about Robert Pape's possessive and threatening behavior towards Becky before her death. It's sad it took so long, and it's sad that this pattern repeats so often. The volatile ex that can't let go.
When we became involved, Pape and Smith were interviewed, but very briefly. And at some point in their interviews, both had declined to speak any further. They wanted their attorneys.
Perhaps most chillingly, investigators uncovered online messages where Pape had talked about burning down someone's house months before the murders. This was the advice he gave a female friend about a bad breakup.
If you know where he lives, we can professionally burn down his house. She responds, "That's right, you're a little pyro." Then Pape answers, "I've gone through a 6-pack of matches already today."
Side note, he was chatting to his future wife, Sarah. While not directly related to Becky's case, these messages showed a preoccupation with arson that took on new significance in light of how the Friedli family was killed.
2 arrests after nearly 8 years in the Pinyon Pines murders.
Robert Pape and Christian Smith were arrested in March 2014 and charged with 3 counts of murder. For Becky's family, it seemed justice might finally have been served after so many years of waiting and wondering. The arrests brought a sense of relief and vindication, but also reopened old wounds as they were forced to relive the details of their loved ones' final moments. But in a shocking turn of events that would once again test the family's resilience, all charges against Pape and Smith were suddenly dropped just 6 months later, in October 2014.
A bombshell out of an Indio courtroom today, charges dropped.
The district attorney's office cited unspecific legal issues with the grand jury's proceedings, a vague explanation that left many questions unanswered. Pape and Smith walked free, leaving the case once again unresolved and Becky's family reeling from this unexpected setback. For Becky's family, the release of the 2 prime suspects was crushing, a devastating blow that seemed to dash their hopes for justice.
We cried. My mom and I and my sister, we called each other and just cried.
It was a heartbreaking reminder of the emotional roller coaster that families of victims often endure during lengthy and complex criminal investigations. Meanwhile, Robert Pape and Chris Smith worked tirelessly to present themselves as innocent, upstanding citizens, employing more cheap manipulation tactics to sway public opinion. Both men had married in the intervening years since the murders, presenting an image of stable, committed partners. Christian Smith, in particular, had built a reputation as a decorated Army veteran, earning 2 Purple Hearts for his service. He and his supporters often highlighted his military accolades, knowing that the image of a war hero would be a difficult one to reconcile with that of a brutal murderer. But we all know you can be both. Well, maybe all bar Chris's dad, who was in complete denial.
My son Christian saves lives. He saved lives in Afghanistan. He doesn't take lives.
Yeah, he did. He took Afghan lives, and he took the lives of 3 people he barely knew, with the excuse that he was helping his best friend get revenge. So perhaps he actually got a kick out of taking lives. Robert Pape, for his part, consistently maintained that he couldn't have killed Becky because he was already in a relationship with his now wife, Sarah, at the time of the murders. He portrayed himself as a devoted husband and an active church member, far removed from the jealous, volatile ex-boyfriend described by the prosecution. Speaking of the prosecution, though, they were not done pursuing the case. In 2016, Pape and Smith were rearrested and charged once again with the murders. This time, the charges stuck, setting the stage for a trial that had been more than a decade in the making. As the trial progressed and evidence mounted, this carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including cell phone records, DNA evidence, and testimony about Pape's threatening behavior towards Becky. Perhaps the most telling was the revelation of jailhouse phone calls between Robert and Sarah, in which they discussed hiding unregistered firearms, including one of the same caliber used in the murders. This evidence not only implicated Pape further in the crimes, but also suggested Sarah had been complicit in covering up evidence. In the face of these revelations, the image of a happy, innocent couple that Pape had worked so hard to cultivate was shattered. Following the trial and Pape's conviction, Sarah divorced him, unable to maintain the illusion of a normal marriage in the face of her husband's guilt. The dissolution of their marriage served as a final, damning indictment of the elaborate deception Pape and Smith had attempted to maintain throughout the investigation and trial. The final trial of Pape and Smith began in April 2018. 12 years after Becky, Vicky, and John were killed. Over the course of a month, prosecutors laid out their case against the 2 men, presenting both old and new evidence linking them to the crime in a comprehensive and compelling narrative. The evidence presented at the trial was damning enough, cell phone records and DNA matches included. Then, there were countless testimonies about Robert Pape's possessive and threatening behavior toward Becky. These painted a picture of a narcissistic man unable to accept the end of their relationship, establishing a clear motive for their crimes. The statements Pape had made online about burning down houses took on new significance in light of how the victims were killed, suggesting a preoccupation with arson that foreshadowed the tragic events. Perhaps most damning was the testimony from a jailhouse informant claiming Christian Smith had confessed details of the crime to him. While jailhouse informant testimony is often viewed skeptically, in this case, it was a final nail to the cross. After 10 days of tense deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. On June 6, 2018, Robert Pape and Christian Smith were found guilty on all counts. Pape was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Becky Friedli and John Hayward, and second-degree murder for Becky's death. Smith was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. They will spend the rest of their lives in prison. For Becky's family, the guilty verdicts brought a measure of long-awaited justice, though it could never ease their loss or bring back their loved ones.
She loved him a lot. And that's probably one of the saddest parts about the whole story is, you know, she loved him to death. And he threw it all away. Threw it all away. For nothing.
Becky Friedli's tragic story highlights the very real dangers that can arise from toxic relationships, particularly for young people with less relationship experience. While no one but her killers bear responsibility for Becky's death, her tragic story can save lives. Recognizing red flags early on is crucial in cases like these. One of the biggest concerns early on, and noticed by many, was Robert's possessiveness and jealousy. He became very controlling of Becky's time and jealous when she interacted with other friends. Behavior that went beyond normal concern and into the realm of emotional manipulation and control. No matter if you've been dating for a month or married for 10 years, no one should keep you from having friends and loved ones. A partner should never replace your friends. Another blatant sign of manipulation and obsession with control was Robert's countless calls every day whenever the two were apart. He took over her person, her schedule, and her time, and she was not allowed to be happy with anyone else but him. Pape also allegedly made threats and used manipulative language, such as saying things like, "No one else can have you." These types of statements are clear attempts to control and intimidate a partner, using fear and emotional manipulation to maintain their power in the relationship. Such language should always be taken seriously as a sign of potential abuse. Even after Becky ended the relationship, Robert's behavior continued to be concerning. He refused to accept the breakup, continually invading Becky's life. This inability to respect boundaries and accept the end of a relationship is a major red flag that can often lead to stalking or escalating violent behavior. The incident at Denny's represented a significant escalation in his behavior. This kind of public confrontation shows a willingness to create scenes and potentially become violent, disregarding social norms and Becky's clear desire to be left alone. It also demonstrated Pape's willingness to involve others like his friend Chris in his harassment of Becky, another troubling sign of escalation. Also, what sort of person is Chris to say yes to such plans so easily? Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, and open communication, not control, jealousy, or fear. If someone behaves with you as Robert did with Becky, it's time to go and seek support during those volatile months after the breakup. When ending a relationship with someone who has displayed concerning behavior, it's crucial to be firm and clear about the breakup. Leaving any ambiguity or giving mixed signals can provide false hope and potentially lead to continued attempts at reconciliation or control. After the breakup, cutting off contact is the safest course of action. This may mean blocking the person's phone number and social media accounts to prevent continued communication. While it might feel harsh, maintaining